I've had this one bubbling for a while, and I hope, obviously, like everybody sensible, that there is no repeat this summer of the hideous violence that we saw last summer during the Farage riots. But you probably sense, as I do, that there are people in both politics and the media who are finding it increasingly hard to camouflage the fact that they really want riots. Some of the newspaper coverage now has moved into cheerleading territory, almost. Something that, I don't know how naive this makes me sound, something that I never thought I'd see. And so much of the coverage, including from people of whom you might have expected better, seems to be deliberately ignoring quite a lot of the evidential material that you need to form an honest opinion. And do you know, as soon as I say those words out loud, I spot the pattern. There's a danger of being a bit of a stuck record. But if you take 2016 as the moment when British politics fully reflected the idea that the facts didn't matter, if you could just stoke people's feelings enough. Tabloid journalism had always concentrated more on feelings than facts, but it had never actually infected the body politic to a point where a plurality could be persuaded to vote for something that didn't actually exist, to vote for what was observably untrue. And rather than back down after that and sort of think, what a wonderful win, there's a growing sense for me that the people who stoked Brexit or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or austerity or whatever it may be, they're on a train that they can't control. That they have to keep feeding the same appetites that fed all of those fact-free phenomena that fed those feelings, trumping facts at every turn. You get it a bit with Trump. Trump's a wonderful example, actually. People who are now pretending to believe that protecting the women and children of this country is such an urgent priority that they are getting pretty close to endorsing the torching of hotels, are also quite often big and even public admirers of a man who boasts and has boasted on tape about the tactics he deploys when he is sexually assaulting women, to take the man at his own word. So they don't care really about the things they claim to care about. If they did, they probably would have told you that 2 out of every 5 people arrested after participating in last summer's Farage riots had been previously reported to the police for domestic abuse. So that's 41% of 899 people arrested for taking part in the violent disorder last July and August had been reported for crimes associated with intimate partner violence. One police force, the arrest figures were as high as 68%, which means 68% of the men arrested for violence during the Farage riots in one police force area had previously been reported for crimes associated with intimate partner violence, for crimes that get filed under domestic abuse. I'll say that again. One police force last summer, of all the men it arrested for violence in the riots, 68% of them had previously been reported for domestic abuse. And that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is the context in which journalists, politicians using words like tinderbox, using language that comes perilously close to sounding supportive, ignoring, for example, the statistics that I've just shared with you, focusing instead upon a kind of tropes and memes. Listen, if one person is accused of one crime, then all we can ask is that the authorities look into it and act as quickly as is possible. The idea that we take it upon ourselves to collectively punish or to collectively pursue loads and loads of people who have nothing to do with that alleged crime is, it is absurd, right? And yet that is very much where the traffic seems to be taking us at the moment. And it plays into something, this, that I've been thinking about, as you know, for a long time. I don't know why it dropped off my radar, probably because there's so much else going on. The diet that gets served up on Twitter in particular, but I suspect also on Facebook, depending on how you how your algorithms have evolved, But the idea that we are living in a country that is somehow unbearable, that we are living in a country where nobody is safe and nothing good ever happens, is taking hold among people who've got no evidence whatsoever to base it upon. I told you the first time I stumbled across those accounts that are dedicated to publishing footage of violence and crime being undertaken by people of color. It doesn't actually matter where, but this narrative of invasion, which is, reminiscent, of course, of the language of 1930s Germany and indeed 1930s Daily Mail. They were very quick to talk about an invasion of German Jews, actually, specifically. You look at this language, you hear the echoes of history, you register some surprise at the people going along with it, some of the people cheering it on, and no surprise at all at people like Farage warning about societal collapse, or the Daily Telegraph employing a phalanx of what can only really be described as apocalypse correspondence. But then the government joins in, talks about society fraying at the edges, talks about the North, Lisa Nandy having worries that the North might go up in flames, without stopping to wonder whether it's true. Would you like to hear some statistics? 72% of us, by which I mean British people, thought that the sentences for those convicted of rioting last year were either fair or not harsh enough. I'm going to tell you that again. 72% of people thought the sentences for those convicted of rioting last summer were either fair or not harsh enough. Less pertinently, but I still think interestingly, the riots in 2011, which right-wing journalists currently poised to support the 2025 rioters, responded to by calling for the army to be brought in and people to be locked up forever for the crime of stealing a bottle of water. The riots in 2011, which I also condemned, if it matters, led to 3.5 times as many arrests as the riots undertaken last year. What percentage of people do you think said that those of us who cleaned up after last summer's riots represented the real Britain as opposed to the rioters? I don't know how much attention you pay to polls, but rarely do you see a figure as high as 87%. You can send an entire country to hell in a handcart on a 52% win. 87% of Brits said that the people who cleaned up after the riots represented the real Britain. And yet you turn on your television this morning, turn on your radio, open up your newspaper, and you could be forgiven for thinking that it's the other way round, that 87% of the country think that the violent rioters with a disproportionate record of domestic abuse somehow represent the real Britain. Funny, isn't it? Or not? Perhaps you have a better grasp than I do on how it happens, why it happens. So we are not on the verge of civil war in this country. The people turning up at one protest this weekend were outnumbered by anti-racist protesters who don't always do their cause any favour, of course, by deploying some of the tactics they deploy. But we can't warn about generalising and then start generalising again ourselves. The reality is so completely at odds with what is being portrayed. It seems like a slightly pathetic analogy, doesn't it, Brexit? But I'm just looking for times in our shared memory, in our collective memory, where people who are supposed to be both informing and helping the public are giving the public polar opposite perceptions of what the reality is on the ground. I have, again, for the record, if I'm going to ask you what your opinions are, I'm going to share mine. I have no beef whatsoever with people who are frightened. I don't want to go back to contempt for the con and compassion for the conned, but the question of whether or not you should be frightened or how frightened you should be seems to me to be completely missing from this coverage. So at the hotel in Epping, one man has been arrested and charged, which means we can't talk about it anymore, for alleged crimes against a girl. And that would frighten me if I lived in that area. But what would you be more frightened by? A rampaging mob of men, 68% of whom are likely to have been questioned for domestic abuse offences, reported even for domestic abuse offences, or a bunch of people who have not been accused of or reported for anything. It's just odd. I don't feel any different When you tell me what the ethnicity of an offender is, or an alleged offender, it doesn't change the way I feel about things. It's the offence and the victim that I think of, not the... And listen, I know that even this isn't self-evident or obvious anymore. I know that even this isn't self-evident or obvious. How many... I don't know. We'd have to check precisely how many violent and sexual offences had been reported in Epping and Ongar in the 12 months up to May this year. I think we can probably find that figure. And then you'd have to ask yourself, why would this one be getting the reaction that it's getting? And again, it's not to criticise the people with that reaction. But those numbers, I'll tell you again, because you can talk about your far-left echo chambers or whatever it may be until you're blue in the face. 72% of people thought the sentences for those convicted of rioting last year were either fair or not harsh enough. What percentage of right-wing commentators in this country do you think are reflecting the views of the 72%? What percentage of right-wing commentators in this country, the people that brought you Brexit, that brought you Boris Johnson, that brought you Liz Truss, that brought you austerity, are reflecting the true feelings of the 87% of British people who believe that their compatriots who cleared up after the riots represent the real Britain, and that the people who undertook the riots are not representing the real Britain at all? I don't know what to do, to be completely honest with you. I don't know how you conduct these conversations anymore. I don't know how you have a conversation that just takes it as read that a crime doesn't become better or worse according to the ethnicity or the identity of the person that is accused of committing it. It seems to me to be so completely at odds with normality that we don't currently have the tools to address it. What do you do to someone who insists that they are living in a state of mortal peril when all of the evidence is that the people they're lining up alongside outside a hotel pose a much greater harm to coin a phrase, to our women and children than the people in the hotel do? But again, I feel the need to keep stressing that if crime is committed or if allegations are made, then the full force of the law must be deployed. And it's not confined, of course, to, well, can I do a phone-in on that? We do a phone-in on whether or not I'm the only one who thinks that some people are actually praying for these riots. Might be a bit tricky legally. But it's pretty obvious, right? When you see some of the coverage, see some of the nibbling at the edges of outright incitement. And actually, you see the people defending those who have actually been done for outright incitement. And can you be a supporter of someone convicted of incitement while not actually being complicit in incitement yourself? I don't know. 16 minutes after 10 is the time. So I think the question I'm minded to ask is about the gulf between the lives that we're leading and the picture of our country that is being portrayed. There was another one. There's a councillor in Westminster from Reform who gave an interview. I told you about this last week. Gave an interview to Sky News in which she was making all sorts of claims about safety. And the massive majority, if not all Londoners, simply don't recognise these pictures being painted on social media often by bloody Russians or by people who've never been anywhere near the capital in decades, or people who live in a pursuit of money now that Elon Musk will send your way if you muster up enough clicks by provoking fear and anger among people who are not in the eye of the storms that they describe. How do you deal with that when almost the entire media and political class, not phrases I use very often, but when the entire media and political class is portraying the United Kingdom as being on the brink of catastrophe, the phrase tinderbox appearing in columns in once respectable newspapers, how do we hold on to the truth? How do we hold on to the truth? Because I can't remember it being this bad. I can't remember opening the Mail or the Telegraph and reading article after article after article designed, and it's because Labour are in power, That's another point that has to be remembered. They couldn't go full in on this. They couldn't go all in on this incredibly damaging denigration of our country when the people that they put in power were in power. But it's only because Labour are in power that they now feel free to go absolutely unhinged on how awful everything is and how things are about to blow up. And of course, I don't know where the line is between, quotes, warning, end quotes, that things are about to blow up and wishing that things are about to blow up. I don't know where it is, but I've got a horrible feeling that we've crossed it. I've got a horrible feeling that the media and much of Westminster is infected with people who want riots because it would prove some unarticulated point about immigration in general or race or ethnicity. I think they want riots now. I really do. And I don't know how you battle that. I don't know how you resist it. I don't know how you deal with it. I don't know how you hold on to the truth. What do you think of that analysis in the first instance? I think there are two countries now. I think there's one that is terminally online and one that isn't. Well, or there's three, because if you're buying newspapers and still looking at traditional media, you're getting now what happens when the tail wags the dog. So they've seen the kind of numbers that social media can muster with this diet of race hate. And they've kind of gone backwards, British newspapers and British commentary has gone backwards into a place that it was, for example, in the 1970s or the 1980s. And they are filling their boots with the kind of rhetoric and the kind of language that would once have been considered reprehensible. And of course, it's still considered reprehensible by many of us. But, talking of invasion, talking of threat, danger, without mentioning how many of the men in last summer's riots had actually been reported for actual allegations of domestic abuse. It's just bonkers, right? So how do we, working on the possibly naive presumption that you, like me, don't think that a crime becomes better or worse according to the ethnicity or the status of the perpetrator, how do we deal with this?